The sound of Steve Harvey's footsteps echoing across the Family Feud stage carried more weight than usual that Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta. What the Martinez family didn't know as they celebrated their correct answer was that Steve had spent 3 months orchestrating the most elaborate surprise in game show history. Behind the studio's back wall, 5 adults who had been searching for each other for 20 years were waiting for the moment when television would become the bridge that brought them home. The Martinez family had driven 16 hours from Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a rented van filled with nervous energy and desperate hope. Roberto and Carmen Martinez, both 48, had built their lives around the beautiful chaos of raising 3 children they'd adopted from the foster care system. Sophia, 22, had been adopted when she was 7 after aging out of multiple placements. Diego, 18, had come to them at age 12 after his previous foster family decided they couldn't handle his behavioral challenges. Elena, 16, had been placed with them as a toddler and had no memory of life before the Martinez home. But what made this family story different from the thousands of other adoption success stories was the secret that each of the 3 adopted children carried. They all remembered siblings they'd been separated from during their various placements, biological brothers and sisters who had been scattered across the foster care system like seeds in the wind. For years they'd searched through social media, contacted caseworkers, and followed every lead, but the trail had always gone cold. Roberto Martinez, a high school guidance counselor who specialized in helping troubled teens, understood the unique pain his children carried. "It's like being homesick for people instead of places," he'd explained to his wife Carmen, a social worker who had seen firsthand how the system sometimes had to make impossible choices about keeping siblings together versus finding them stable homes. The Martinez family had applied to be on Family Feud not for the money, but for the platform. They'd hoped that appearing on national television might somehow reach the siblings they'd lost touch with, that someone somewhere might see them and make a connection. It was a long shot, but when you've exhausted every other option, long shots start to feel like the only shots worth taking. Steve Harvey had received their audition video 6 months earlier, and something about their story had stayed with him long after he'd watched hundreds of other family submissions. Maybe it was the way Sophia talked about her little brother Miguel, who would be 20 now but who she remembered as a 5-year-old who was afraid of thunderstorms. Maybe it was Diego's description of his sister Anna, who had been placed in a different home when he was 8, because the foster family could only take 1 child. Or maybe it was Elena's quiet mention of her older brother Carlos, who had been aged out of the system before she was old enough to remember him clearly. Whatever it was, Steve had made a decision that went far beyond entertainment. He tasked his production team with something unprecedented: find the missing siblings, use every resource available, hire private investigators if necessary, and create the kind of reunion that could only happen when television becomes a force for healing instead of just entertainment. The search had taken months. Social media deep dives, foster care record research, private investigator work, and countless phone calls to social workers across the Southwest. Slowly, piece by piece, the Martinez siblings' biological family had been found. Miguel Rodriguez, now 20, working as a mechanic in Phoenix, and married with a baby daughter. Anna Lopez, 19, studying nursing in Denver and raising her 3-year-old son as a single mother. Carlos Gutierrez, 24, who had taken their mother's maiden name and was serving as a paramedic in Las Vegas. Each sibling had been contacted carefully, privately, with verification and explanations about who was calling and why. Each had broken down when they learned that their brothers and sisters were not only alive and thriving, but were about to be on national television. Each had agreed to participate in what Steve's team was calling Project Reunion, the most elaborate surprise in Family Feud history. The game had been progressing normally, with the Martinez family holding their own against the Johnson family from Memphis. Sophia had given strong answers, Diego had surprised everyone with his quick wit, and Elena had shown the poise that came from being the youngest in a family that had taught her she was valued and heard. Roberto and Carmen beamed with pride as they watched their children shine under the studio lights. But Steve Harvey had been watching for something specific, waiting for the right moment to shift from entertainment to transformation. That moment came during the 4th round when he announced a category that would change everything: Things you've always wanted to find. Sophia had stepped to the podium first, and without hesitation she'd answered, "My little brother." The response wasn't on the board, but the audience had responded with the kind of empathetic awe that comes when people recognize authentic emotion. Steve had paused then, looking at Sophia with an expression that was part game show host, part conspirator. "Your little brother?" he'd asked gently. "Tell me about that." "Miguel," Sophia had said, her voice catching slightly. "He was 5 when we got separated in foster care. I was 7. I've been looking for him for 15 years. The studio had fallen quiet as Sophia's story hung in the air. Steve had looked at Diego and Elena, reading their expressions and understanding that this wasn't just Sophia's story, it was the story of the entire family. "Diego," Steve had said. "Elena, do y'all have people you've been looking for too?" Diego had nodded, his usual teenage bravado replaced by vulnerability. "My sister Ana, she was 6 when they split us up. And Carlos, my older brother, he was 14 when he aged out." Elena, who rarely spoke about her memories from before the Martinez family, had surprised everyone by stepping forward. "I remember Carlos a little bit. He used to sing to me when I had nightmares." The audience was completely silent now, understanding that they were witnessing something far more profound than a game show. Steve Harvey had set down his cards and approached the Martinez family with the careful reverence of someone who was about to change lives. "Sophia, Diego, Elena," Steve had said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "What if I told you that I might be able to help with that? What if I told you that your family, your whole family, is bigger than you remember?" The Martinez children had looked at each other, then at their adoptive parents, then back at Steve, not daring to hope, but unable to stop themselves from wondering what he meant. "Roberto, Carmen," Steve had continued, "y'all raised these kids to be amazing people, but I wonder how you'd feel about your family getting a little bigger today." Roberto had stepped forward, his guidance counselor instincts recognizing that something significant was about to happen. "Steve, what are you talking about?" Steve had smiled then, the kind of smile that comes when you're about to deliver a gift you've been planning for months. "Well," he'd said, "it turns out that when you put the full resources of a television show behind finding people, sometimes you get lucky." He'd gestured toward the back wall of the studio, where a section that looked like standard decoration was actually a concealed entrance. "Sophia, you said you've been looking for Miguel for 15 years. Diego, you've been missing Ana and Carlos. Elena, you remember Carlos singing to you." The studio audience had begun to understand what was happening. The collective intake of breath audible as 300 people realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. "What if I told you," Steve had continued, "that they've been looking for you too?" The back wall had opened then, and Miguel Rodriguez had stepped out first. 20 years old, tall and lean like Diego, with Sophia's eyes and a smile that was unmistakably familiar despite the years that had changed his face. Sophia had gasped, bringing both hands to her mouth as she recognized the little brother she'd protected in foster care, now grown into a man but still carrying the gentle spirit she remembered. Ana Lopez had emerged next, 19 and beautiful, with Elena's delicate features and Diego's determined expression. She'd been crying before she'd even fully entered the studio, overwhelmed by seeing the siblings she'd never stopped missing. And finally, Carlos Gutierrez had appeared, 24 and strong, wearing his paramedic uniform, because he'd come straight from work, unwilling to miss this moment for anything. Elena had started crying the moment she saw him, some deep cellular memory, recognizing the brother who had sung away her childhood fears. The studio had erupted then, but not with typical game show applause. This was the sound of 300 people witnessing a miracle, the kind of joy that comes when something that was broken gets put back together in the most beautiful way possible. Miguel had run to Sofia first, and when he'd wrapped his arms around his sister, 20 years of separation had collapsed into a moment of pure reunion. "Sophie," he'd whispered, using the nickname only he had ever called her, "I never stopped looking for you." Ana had reached Diego and Elena simultaneously, and the three of them had formed a circle of arms and tears and laughter, trying to speak and hug, and look at each other all at the same time. "You're so tall," Anna had said to Diego through her tears. "And Elena, you're so beautiful. I have a son," she'd added suddenly. "You have a nephew." Carlos had approached more slowly, understanding that Elena might not remember him clearly, but when she'd looked up at him and whispered, "You used to sing Las Mañanitas," he'd broken down completely. "You remember," he'd said, lifting her off the ground in a hug that spanned decades. "You were so little, I didn't think you'd remember." Steve Harvey had stood in the middle of this reunion, tears streaming down his face, understanding that this was the most important thing he'd ever done in his career. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was healing happening in real time, broadcast to millions of people who were witnessing what love looks like when it finally finds its way home. Roberto and Carmen Martinez had watched their adopted children reunite with their biological siblings with the kind of joy that only comes from parents who understand that love multiplies rather than divides. There was no jealousy, no fear of being replaced, only happiness that their children's circles of love were expanding. "Steve," Roberto had said when the initial flood of emotion had settled slightly, "how did you find them?" Steve had wiped his eyes and smiled. "When you've got kids searching for kids, you do whatever it takes. My team spent 3 months tracking down every lead, following every connection, making sure these were the right people. Because some things are too important to get wrong." Miguel had turned to the Martinez parents then, understanding that these were the people who had given his sister the stability and love that had allowed her to thrive. "Thank you," he'd said simply. "Thank you for taking care of my family when I couldn't." What had followed was the most extraordinary Family Feud episode ever filmed. The game had been abandoned entirely as the studio became the setting for a reunion that redefined what family could look like. The biological siblings had shared their stories, Miguel's marriage and new daughter, Anna's nursing school and single motherhood, Carlos's career as a first responder, while the Martinez family had shared how adoption had given them not just children but purpose. Elena had introduced Anna to the concept of having younger siblings. The Martinez family had adopted 2 more children since Elena's placement, and Anna had shown pictures of her son, making Diego and Elena aunts and uncles for the first time. Carlos had learned that Elena had become an artist, specializing in portraits, and that she'd drawn pictures of him from memory for years, trying to hold on to the fragments of their shared past. Sofia had discovered that Miguel had mechanical skills their father would have been proud of, and that he'd named his daughter Sofia in honor of the sister he'd never stopped missing. The reunion had continued for hours after the cameras officially stopped rolling. Steve had arranged for the entire extended family to have dinner together, creating the kind of gathering that none of them had experienced since childhood. 6 months later, when the episode finally aired, it became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about adoption, foster care, and the importance of maintaining sibling connections when possible. The Martinez-Rodriguez-Lopez-Gutierrez family now gathers every Christmas, Easter, and for any major life event. Miguel and his wife moved to Albuquerque to be closer to his sister. Anna transferred to a nursing program in New Mexico, so her son could grow up with his aunts and uncles. Carlos visits monthly and has become a mentor to the younger Martinez children. Roberto and Carmen's family grew from 5 to 11 people overnight, and they've never been happier. Their house is chaos during holidays, filled with the beautiful noise of a family that was scattered and is now whole. Steve Harvey established the Find Your Family Foundation, dedicated to helping foster care alumni reconnect with separated siblings. The foundation has successfully reunited over 200 families since the Martinez reunion. Sofia graduated from college with a degree in social work and now specializes in sibling placement and reunification. "What happened to us on Family Feud," she often tells the families she works with, "doesn't have to happen to you. With enough love and persistence, families can find their way back together." Diego started a non-profit organization that helps former foster youth navigate the search for biological family members, using social media, public records, and volunteer investigators to bridge the gaps that time and bureaucracy create. Alina's artwork now includes a series of paintings depicting family reunions, with the centerpiece being a large canvas showing the moment when the studio wall opened and her brothers and sisters stepped back into her life. Miguel, Anna, and Carlos all speak regularly at foster care conferences, sharing their story and advocating for policies that prioritize keeping siblings together when possible and maintaining connections when separation is unavoidable. The episode continues to circulate on social media, shared by people who understand that sometimes the most important stories are about what happens when what was lost gets found again. Comments come from foster care alumni, adoptive families, social workers, and people who simply need to be reminded that families come in all forms and that love has an unlimited capacity to expand and include. The most beautiful thing about what happened on Family Feud, Carmen Martinez said in a follow-up interview, wasn't just that our kids found their siblings. It was that we all learned that love doesn't have limits. Our family didn't get divided when the biological siblings came back into the picture. Our family just got bigger, stronger, and more beautiful. The lesson the Martinez family taught the world through their Family Feud reunion was simple but profound. Family is both the people who raise you and the people who share your earliest memories, the people who choose you and the people you're born connected to, the people who save you and the people you save in return. Sometimes, if you're very lucky and very persistent, you get to have all of those people in your life at the same time. And sometimes, if you're extraordinarily lucky, a game show host cares enough to spend 3 months making sure that love finds its way home.